Well, good morning. It's Mark Lanier with your video thought for the day. Okay, great week in front of us. Let me tell you why. Last week, we spent in the wilderness. Now, I am still in Cleveland and I am still in trial and I'm missing my home and there's a wilderness element to it. But I thought this week we'd do something a little bit different. I thought just for some fun, we would chase after some animal references in the Bible, especially in the Old Testament, the Hebrew Bible. The reason why is, mainly because I think it'd be cool, but there's an element to it that's really interesting because so many Hebrew words are figurative or metaphors for other ideas. And one of them is the word that I want to look at today. It's the Hebrew word parah. Now, parah is a wild donkey. You say, well, a donkey's a donkey's a donkey. No, the Hebrew had different words for donkeys. There's chamor, which is a domesticated donkey, but a parah is a wild donkey. And as a wild donkey, it's not only one that would be seen out in the wilderness or wherever, but it also was a metaphor or a figure and like donkey today in a sense can be one in English for someone who's stubborn. And that's not that far. A wild donkey could be figurative of someone who's very willful, very intent on their own will. But it was also kind of a metaphor oftentimes for someone who has lust or an unbridled love of idolatry. And so the idea of a parah, a donkey, a wild donkey being someone like that gives meaning to two passages that I want to throw at you today for you to chew on in this video thought for the day. The first one comes from the Old Testament prophet Jeremiah. Now, Jeremiah is a book that's written during the critical time when Israel's about to be invaded and is invaded by Babylon, and the Jerusalem is conquered and the temple is brought down, and it's a very depressing book where Jeremiah goes after the people of God and explains why God's judgment's coming on them. But in chapter 2 of Jeremiah talks about how God had given Israel the fruit of the wilderness. We talked about the wilderness last week, that they came into the promised land and God blessed them with bounty and plenty. And instead of being thankful and worshiping the Lord, they turned into a bunch of wild donkeys. They turned into a bunch of parah. They turned into a bunch of willful, lusting, idolatrous people. And so you get this passage in chapter 2, verse 24. It says, a wild donkey used to the wilderness, used as in like that's what you're used to, used in the wilderness, to the wilderness, is in the heat sniffing the wind. Who can restrain her lust? The prophet asks. None who seek her need weary themselves. This is what Israel had become. This idolatrous, very willful, intent on themselves, lustful, wild donkey. That's not a good thing. We looked at the wilderness and how the wilderness, we've got to fight against grumbling and mumbling and things like that. This idea is, what about when you're not in the wilderness and things are good? Then you've got to fight against living for yourself. You've got to fight against a willfulness that's centered on you. You've got to fight against narcissism. You've got to fight against that lust, that desire to fill your own wants and needs. Because we always need to be mission critical on God, mission critical on His needs, mission critical on serving, mission critical on caring for and loving beyond ourselves. That needs to be our focus, whether we're in a wilderness or whether we're in a land of plenty. Our focus should always be, how do we live today to best reflect God's desires, wishes, and priorities? And that's my goal. That's what I want to think of today. Now, I told you I had two verses. I've got one more. There's a passage in Job that I really, really like about para. Job says in Job 11:12 that a stupid man will get understanding when a para, a wild donkey's colt, is born a human being. Wild donkeys are off and breeding, and they don't have human beings, they have wild donkeys. In that way, a stupid man will never get understanding. I don't want to be a wild donkey living after my own interests and never getting the understanding of God. I want to be someone who lives God's purposes and then gets God's wisdom. You got it? It's your video thought for the day. Another animal tomorrow.